He, a skeptical tycoon, was oblivious to his own feelings. She, a humble receptionist, graced a bridal gown at his company's event. The sight of her, so desirable, struck Arthur. Overwhelming jealousy consumed him, and he realized he'd been ignoring his own heart. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Alice Miller adjusted the faux pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother and checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 8 a.m. sharp, as always. Her morning routine on the 32nd floor of the Manhattan Tower building followed the same ritual for 3 years, arriving 15 minutes before her shift, organizing the reception desk, checking the CEO's appointment schedule, and preparing the special blend coffee that he never thanked her for, but always drank. At 28, Alice had learned to find dignity in the small things. Her receptionist's salary barely covered the rent for her one-bedroom apartment in Queens that she shared with her younger sister, but it was enough to help her widowed mother in the suburbs of Long Island. Every dollar saved was a step closer to lifting her family out of the precarious situation they'd been in since her father's death. The engagement ring on her ring finger weighed more than the 2 grams of gold it actually contained. Mark, her fiancé of 6 months, was a good man, an accountant, stable, with his own condo in Brooklyn and sensible plans for the future. There was no passionate fire, but there was security. The wedding was set for December, and Alice knew it was the right choice for her situation. Mark offered stability for her and financial help for her family. It was an arrangement that made sense, even if her heart remained curiously silent. 40 floors above, Arthur Sterling reviewed financial reports while watching the sunrise paint the Hudson River with golden hues. At 38, he commanded a tech empire worth billions of dollars. Sterling Tech developed software for the country's largest corporations, and his influence extended far beyond business. Politicians consulted him. Investors vied for his attention, and the media followed his every move. Arthur had built everything with his own hands, transforming a small startup into a business behemoth. But success had come at a price. Relationships had turned out to be self-serving. Friendships had proven calculating, and love had become a concept he had banished from his vocabulary. He trusted only numbers, contracts, and measurable results. Feelings were unpredictable variables that didn't fit into his spreadsheets. He knew Alice only as the efficient receptionist on the 32nd floor. In the 3 years that she had held that position, their interactions were limited to cordial greetings and work instructions. Arthur noticed her competence. She was never late, never made mistakes, and always anticipated his professional needs. She was an exemplary employee, invisible in her perfection. Alice, on the other hand, knew Arthur in a way he couldn't imagine. She knew he always drank his coffee at 9:15, that he furrowed his brow when he was concentrated, that he wore a navy blue tie every Friday. She watched him walk through the lobby every day, imposing in his impeccable suit, and felt an admiration that she would never confess to anyone. He belonged to a completely different world than hers, a universe of private helicopters, dinners in Michelin-starred restaurants, and business magazine covers. Their lives ran in parallel, never truly intersecting, until Marcia from Human Resources appeared at the reception desk one morning in October with an unusual proposal. "Alice, I need to talk to you about the company's charity event," Marcia said, leaning on the reception counter. "The board has approved a charity event for the end of the month, a fashion show to raise funds for the Bright Future Institute, which helps underprivileged children." Alice looked up from her computer, intrigued. "That's a wonderful initiative. How can I help with the organization?" "Actually," Marcia smiled conspiratorially, "we need employees to participate as models. It will be a themed fashion show of wedding dresses. The idea is to show that every woman deserves to feel like a princess for a day, regardless of her background." Alice's heart skipped a beat. "Me, as a model? You have the perfect profile, Alice. You're beautiful, elegant, and you represent exactly the audience we want to support. Besides, You're engaged, so there would be a special authenticity. Alice hesitated. The idea of walking in front of hundreds of people, including Arthur Sterling and all the company executives, terrified her. But the cause was noble, and she had never had the opportunity to wear a real wedding dress. Hers would be a simple model, bought on sale. The event will be in the company's main hall, Marcia continued. Arthur Sterling himself will be present, along with investors and the press. It's a chance for Sterling Tech to show its humanitarian side. After much thought, Alice accepted. She didn't imagine that this decision would completely change the course of her life, nor that Arthur Sterling, the man she considered unattainable, was about to discover feelings he thought were dead forever. The days leading up to the fashion show passed with agonizing speed for Alice. The dress fittings, runway rehearsals, and interviews with the press made her increasingly nervous. Marcia had chosen a stunning dress for her, a mermaid model in Italian silk with delicate embroidery and pearls and crystals that captured the light in a magical way. It was the kind of dress that Alice had never dreamed of wearing. "You look radiant," commented Isabella, the stylist responsible for the adjustments, as she pinned the hem. "This dress was made for you." Alice looked at her reflection in the studio mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman who stared back had an elegance that she didn't know she possessed, a delicacy that contrasted with the simple life she had always led. For a moment she allowed herself to dream. What if she were a princess? What if she belonged to that world of luxury and sophistication? She shook her head, dismissing foolish thoughts. It was just a charity event. In a few hours, she would go back to being the receptionist on the 32nd floor, and Mark would pick her up for dinner at their favorite diner. Arthur, on the other hand, viewed the event as just another social obligation. He had donated a generous amount to the Bright Future Institute and would attend as a matter of protocol, greet some investors, pose for photos with the press, and leave as quickly as possible. He had no patience for themed events and considered the idea of the bridal fashion show slightly tacky. Sterling Tech's main hall had been transformed into a dreamscape. Golden lights created a welcoming atmosphere, white flowers adorned each table, and an elegant runway stretched through the center of the room. 300 guests occupied the chairs: business executives, socialites, journalists, and company employees. Arthur positioned himself at a reserved table alongside other executives, watching the fashion show with the polished interest of someone fulfilling an agenda. The first models paraded, employees from finance, marketing, some wives of directors. He applauded politely, exchanged some comments with colleagues about the organization of the event. And then she appeared. Alice emerged at the start of the runway like an apparition. The transformation was complete. Her brown hair was styled in an elegant updo with a few loose strands framing her face. Her makeup highlighted her almond-shaped eyes, and the dress made her look like a goddess. She walked with a natural grace, shy but determined, and there was something in her discreet smile that radiated genuine happiness. Arthur felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The air seemed to thin in his lungs. For the first time in years, he was seeing Alice, really seeing her. Not the competent receptionist, but the woman. And she was absolutely stunning. As Alice walked down the runway, Arthur found himself imagining scenarios that terrified him. Her at the altar saying "I do" to another man. Her being kissed by another man. Her building a life, a family, a complete happiness with someone who wasn't him. The pain that shot through his chest was so intense that he needed to grip the table to not show the shock. Jealousy. That's what he was feeling. A visceral, primitive jealousy that made him want to shout that Alice was his, even knowing he had no right over her. The feeling was so powerful that it scared him. Arthur Sterling, the man who controlled billions and had never lost his balance, was being undone by the sight of a woman dressed in a wedding gown. Alice on the runway felt a different gaze on her. She turned instinctively and met Arthur's eyes fixed on her, with an intensity that made her stumble slightly. She had never seen him look at her that way, as if she were the only person in the room. Her heart raced, and a wave of heat rose up her neck to her cheeks. The obstacles between them had never seemed so obvious. Arthur represented everything she wasn't: wealth, power, sophistication. He mingled with senators and ambassadors, while she barely knew the city beyond the boroughs where she had grown up. He owned mansions, yachts, and private jets. She shared a cramped apartment with her sister. And more importantly, she was engaged to another man. Mark was in the audience, proudly applauding his fiancée, without imagining the revolution happening in Arthur Sterling's heart. To him, Alice remained the same sweet and predictable woman with whom he planned a quiet life. He didn't perceive the fire that had ignited in that hall. When Alice finished her walk and retired, from the runway, Arthur felt an irresistible urge to follow her. He excused himself from the table and walked through the corridors until he found her in the improvised dressing room, still dressed in the wedding gown, touching up her makeup in front of the mirror. "Alice," he said, and his own voice sounded strange to his ears, hoarse, loaded with an emotion he couldn't control. She turned, surprised. "Mr. Sterling, is something wrong? Do you need anything?" For a moment, Arthur couldn't speak. Seeing her up close, in that dress, with her eyes shining with nervousness, was even more devastating. He wanted to say 1,000 things. That she looked magnificent, that he hadn't been able to take his eyes off her, that the idea of seeing her marry another man was killing him inside. "You were extraordinary," he managed to say finally. "The event was a success. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I'm glad you approved." Alice felt uncomfortable with his proximity, with the way he was looking at her. "The dress is really beautiful. I've never worn anything like it." "It looks perfect on you," Arthur said, and the words came out before he could hold them back. "Your fiancé is a lucky man." Alice lowered her eyes, unconsciously touching her engagement ring. "Mark is a good man." Arthur noticed that she didn't say, "I love Mark," or "I'm happy with him." She just said he was good, and that small difference lit a dangerous hope in his chest. "Alice," he began, taking a step forward, "I'd like to talk to you about a special company project. Maybe we can schedule a time." She raised her eyes, confused. "A project, Mr. Sterling?" "Yes, tomorrow in my office. At 5 in the afternoon." It wasn't true. There was no project at all. But Arthur needed to see her again, needed to understand what was happening to him, needed to find out if there was anything beyond the respectful professional admiration in her eyes. Alice nodded, intrigued. "Of course, Mr. Sterling, I'll be there." When Arthur left the dressing room, he knew he had crossed a dangerous line. For the first time in years, he was acting on impulse, guided by feelings he couldn't rationalize. And for the first time in his life, he didn't care about the consequences. Alice spent the next day in growing anxiety. The 5 o'clock meeting occupied all her thoughts, mixing professional curiosity with a restlessness she couldn't explain. What project could be so special that it would require a private conversation in the CEO's office? At 5 p.m. sharp, she knocked on the door of Arthur's office. The office was a reflection of the man, elegant, imposing, and minimalist. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the decor, in shades of grey and black, conveyed seriousness and power. "Come in, Alice. Please, have a seat," Arthur said, indicating the leather armchairs in front of his desk. He had taken off his jacket and loosened his tie, a detail that made him slightly more approachable. She sat down, crossing her hands in her lap. "What project would you like to talk about?" Arthur hesitated. All day long, he had tried to invent a plausible project, but his creative mind in the business world proved useless when it came to creating pretexts to be near a woman. The truth was that he just wanted to get to know her better, to understand who Alice Miller was beyond the efficient receptionist. "Actually," he said, getting up and walking to the window, "I wanted to talk about you." "About me, sir?" Alice felt her heart race. "Yesterday, during the fashion show, I realized that you've been working here for 3 years, and I know very little about who Alice Miller is." Arthur turned to face her. "Tell me about yourself, your family, your dreams, your choices." The question caught her off guard. No one in the corporate environment had ever shown genuine interest in her personal life. "I'm not sure I understand, Mr. Sterling. Why would that be important?" Because good employees are the heart of any company, Arthur lied partially. And you are exceptional at what you do. I deserve to know better the people who make sterling tech work. Alice took a deep breath. Well, I come from the Bronx. My mom raised 2 daughters alone after my dad died. I was 15 when he had a heart attack. Since then, I've worked to help at home. Her hands moved nervously in her lap. It's not a very interesting story. On the contrary, Arthur said, sitting back down. 15 is very young to take on adult responsibilities. How did you get here? I studied at night, worked during the day. I took a vocational course in administration. Alice smiled shyly. When I got the job here, it was like a miracle. The salary allows me to help my mom and still dream of a better future. And marriage is part of that better future? The question was too intimate, but Alice found herself answering. Mark is a good man, stable, reliable. He offers security for me and my family. Arthur noted that she again didn't mention love. Security is important, he agreed, but there was something in his tone that made Alice look up to meet his gaze. But sometimes we settle for security when we deserve so much more. Are you speaking from personal experience? The question slipped out before Alice could censor herself. It was too bold to question the CEO about his personal life. But Arthur didn't seem offended. Instead, a melancholy smile crossed his face. Maybe, he admitted. My experience with relationships has taught me that it's easier to avoid them completely. Alice felt an unexpected courage. Why avoid? A man like you certainly has no difficulty in finding women interested in my money. Arthur finished bitterly. No, Alice, I have no difficulty. But finding someone who sees me beyond the bank account, that's very different. There was a vulnerability in that confession that touched Alice deeply. During all those years, she had seen Arthur Sterling as an invincible man, someone for whom everything came easily. Discovering that he also faced loneliness humanized him in an unexpected way. It must be hard to trust people's intentions, she said gently. Arthur got up again and walked to a picture on the wall, an old black and white photo of a young couple. Alice noticed that he fixed his eyes on the image for a moment that was too long. My parents, he explained, noticing her gaze. They had the kind of love that I thought no longer existed in the real world. Thought? Alice got up and approached to get a better look at the photo. They aren't anymore. My mother died when I was 22, cancer. Arthur gently touched the frame. My father never recovered. He lived 16 years after her, but it was as if part of him had died with her. I saw what true love can do to a person when they lose what matters most. Alice felt a pang in her chest. She was beginning to understand why Arthur had closed himself off to feelings. He must have loved your mother very much. He did. And it destroyed him when she was gone. Arthur turned to Alice, and she saw a deep sadness in his eyes. For years, I used that as an excuse not to get emotionally involved with anyone. It seemed safer to build walls than to open my heart to the possibility of losing everything. But that's not living, Alice said softly. It's just existing. Her words hit him like a lightning bolt. That was exactly what he had been doing, existing, not living. He had built an empire, accumulated wealth, earned the respect of the business world, but had completely forgotten what it felt like to be truly alive. And you, Alice? Are you living or just existing with your arranged marriage? The question left her speechless. Mark offered security, stability, a predictable future. But Arthur was right. It wasn't life, it was just existence. She had never felt her heart race when Mark entered the room, never lost sleep thinking about him, never daydreamed about his kisses. Adieu, she began, but was interrupted by the ringing of the phone on Arthur's desk. He ignored it. The phone kept ringing. Maybe it's important, Alice said, trying to break the tension of the moment. Arthur answered irritably. Yes, it was Sandra, his executive assistant. Mr. Sterling, sorry to interrupt, but your meeting with the Japanese investors has been moved forward to 6 in the afternoon. They're already on their way. Arthur looked at Alice, frustrated by the interruption at the most intimate moment they had shared. All right, prepare the meeting room. When he hung up, Alice was already getting up. I should go. I don't want to hold you up. Alice, he said as she reached the door. "Our conversation, it meant a lot to me. I'd like to continue it soon." She turned, confused by the contradictory feelings that the conversation had aroused. "Mr. Sterling, Arthur," he corrected. "When we're alone, call me Arthur." Alice felt a shiver run down her spine. The intimacy of that request changed everything between them. "Arthur," she repeated in a low voice, testing the name on her lips. When she left the office, Alice knew that something fundamental had changed. Arthur was no longer the unattainable CEO. He was a lonely man who had built walls to protect a wounded heart. And she, inexplicably, felt an overwhelming desire to help him tear them down. In the week following the conversation in the office, Alice found herself thinking about Arthur with a frequency that worried her. Each professional interaction now carried an electric charge that made her nervous. He, in turn, created excuses to pass by the reception desk, requested reports that he could ask for by email, questioned schedules that his executive assistant normally resolved. It was Thursday when Alice's phone rang at 9 in the evening. She was at home, helping Mark choose curtains for their apartment, when she saw the name Mom on the screen. "Hello, Mom." "Alice." "Honey," Donna Carmen's voice trembled with fear. "I need you to come. I'm at St. George's Hospital in the Bronx." Alice's blood froze. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I had terrible chest pain. Carla brought me by taxi. The doctors want to do some tests, but..." "Alice, I don't have money to pay. The health insurance doesn't cover everything, and Mom, don't worry about that now. I'm coming." Alice hung up and ran to grab her purse, quickly explaining the situation to Mark. "I'll go with you," he said, dropping the curtains. "You don't have to, Mark. You have work early tomorrow. Alice, your mum could be having a heart attack. I'm not going to let you face this alone." During the bus ride to the Bronx, Alice mentally calculated her savings. She had a few thousand saved for the wedding, but if her mother needed surgery or prolonged hospitalization, it wouldn't be enough. Anguish consumed her. At the hospital, they found Donna Carmen on a gurney in the emergency room hallway, pale and frightened. Carla, Alice's younger sister, was by her side, holding her hand. "Mom," Alice whispered, kissing the forehead of the woman who had raised 2 daughters alone. "How are you feeling?" "Better now that you're here, honey. But I'm worried about the expenses." The on-call doctor approached, a young man visibly overworked. "Family of Mrs. Carmen Miller." "I'm her daughter," Alice stood up. "We need to do a series of urgent tests, electrocardiogram, blood tests, CT scan. There are signs that it could be the start of a heart attack. The problem is that her plan doesn't cover all the necessary procedures." "How much would it cost?" Alice asked, already knowing that she didn't have the amount. "Between $15,000 and $20,000, depending on the complexity." Alice felt the world collapse. It was more than her savings, more than she could borrow. Mark touched her arm, offering silent support, but she knew that he didn't have that amount either. That's when her cell phone rang. "Arthur Sterling. Why would he be calling at 11 at night?" "Excuse me," she said, stepping away to answer. "Hello? Alice, I'm sorry to call so late. I saw that you weren't online in the company system, and I was worried. You'd never leave before closing." His voice, full of genuine concern, almost made her burst into tears. "Arthur, I'm at the hospital. My mom is feeling sick and..." "Which hospital?" "I'm coming." "No, you don't need to. It's in the Bronx, very far." "Alice, which hospital?" "St. George's, but really you don't need to. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He hung up before she could protest. Alice looked at the phone, confused and touched at the same time. Why would Arthur come to the Bronx in the middle of the night? 35 minutes later, she saw Arthur entering the hospital lobby. He had traded the suit for jeans and a casual shirt, but even so, he was completely out of place in the environment. Some people recognized him and whispered, "How is she?" was the first thing he asked. "Stable, but she needs urgent tests that cost more than I can afford," Alice said, fighting back tears. Arthur didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the reception desk. "Good evening. I'm here about the patient Carmen Miller. I need to speak with the hospital administrator. Sir, it's almost midnight. It's urgent. Tell them it's Arthur Sterling from Sterling Tech." The name had immediate effect. In 10 minutes, the hospital administrator appeared, clearly nervous about receiving such an illustrious visit. "Dr. Mendez," Arthur introduced himself, "I need Mrs. Carmen Miller to receive the best treatment available. I want her to be transferred to a private room, that all the tests be done immediately, and that the best specialists be called. All expenses will be paid by me." Alice watched him, shocked. "Arthur, you can't." "I can and I will," he said firmly. "Your mother is going to be fine." The next few hours passed in a blur. Donna Carmen was transferred to a comfortable room, a team of cardiologists was called, and all the tests were performed. While they waited for the results, Alice and Arthur were alone in the waiting room. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Arthur took a while to answer. "Because you shouldn't have to choose between your mother's life and your financial security. And because," he hesitated, "because I can't stand to see you suffer." Alice felt tears burning her eyes. "Arthur, and also because I recognize a daughter's love for her mother. I know what it's like to be desperate when the person we love most is in danger." She reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you. I don't have words to thank you." When their fingers touched, an electric current ran through both of them. Arthur intertwined his fingers with hers, and they stayed like that, holding hands in the waiting room, sharing an intimacy that went far beyond the physical. The tests came back good, the cardiologist announced at 4 a.m. It was a scare. Stress and high blood pressure, but not a heart attack. "With medication and rest, she'll be fine." Alice burst into tears of relief in Arthur's arms. He hugged her tight, feeling her body tremble against his chest, breathing in the soft scent of her hair. It was the first time he had really touched her, and the feeling was overwhelming. "It's okay," he murmured against her ear. "Your mother is going to be fine." When Alice pulled away, their eyes met in a moment charged with emotion. For an instant, it seemed like he was going to kiss her. She also felt the magnetic attraction, the desire to surrender to that moment of shared vulnerability. That's when Mark appeared at the entrance of the room. "Alice, I came as soon as I could get a cab," he said, stopping when he saw his fiancée in the arms of another man, a man he immediately recognized from business magazines. The moment unraveled instantly. Alice stepped away from Arthur, blushing intensely. "Mark, this is Arthur Sterling, my boss. He helped with my mom's test costs." Mark extended his hand, clearly uncomfortable. "Thank you very much, Mr. Sterling. Alice, how is your mother?" While Alice explained the situation, Arthur watched the couple's interaction. Mark was exactly what he had imagined, an ordinary, decent man who offered stability. And it was clear that he had noticed the intimacy of the moment he had interrupted. When Alice accompanied Mark to see Donna Carmen, Arthur left the hospital knowing that he had crossed a dangerous line. He had not only spent a fortune to help an employee, which would already generate comments, but he had exposed himself emotionally in a way that made his feelings obvious. And Mark had seen everything. In the following days, rumors spread through the company like wildfire. CEO Arthur Sterling had spent the night at the hospital with Alice, the receptionist. Some versions said that they were seen holding hands, others that she had cried in his arms. Alice felt all eyes on her as she walked through the corridors. Mark started asking questions that she didn't know how to answer. And Arthur, trying to protect her reputation, began to treat her with an excessive formality that only intensified the speculation. But the connection had been established. Both knew that something fundamental had changed that night at the hospital, and both knew that the consequences of that change would be inevitable. That the rumors at Sterling Tech spread like wildfire. In a few days, the story of the night at the hospital had taken on a life of its own, growing and distorting with each retelling. Some versions said that Arthur had spent $500,000 on treatments for Alice's mother. Others whispered that they had been seen kissing at the hospital. The most malicious insinuated that Alice was using her mother's illness to seduce the CEO. Alice felt the weight of the stairs wherever she went. Conversations stopped when she approached. Colleagues who had previously been cordial now treated her with envious coldness, and even the cleaning staff whispered when she passed. "You need to stop this," Mark said on a Thursday night while they were having dinner, at the small diner where they always went. His words were direct without beating around the bush. "People are talking, Alice, about you and your boss." Alice almost choked on her water. "Talking about what, Mark?" "Don't play dumb. My sister works in the legal department at Verizon. She said that even there, they are commenting about the receptionist who entangled Arthur Sterling, that you're using your mother to get favors." The accusation hit her like a slap. "How can you think that of me? I saw you at the hospital, Alice. I saw how he was holding you, how you were looking at each other." "I'm not an idiot." Mark leaned over the table. "Are you involved with him?" "No." Alice answered too quickly, too loudly. "He just helped me in an emergency. That's all." "That's all?" Mark laughed bitterly. "Alice, the man spent a fortune on your mother. Billionaires don't do that for ordinary employees, no matter how efficient they are." Alice didn't know how to answer because Mark wasn't completely wrong. Arthur's help had far exceeded any normal professional relationship. And she couldn't deny, not even to herself, that she felt something deep for him. "Mark, you're being paranoid. Arthur Sterling barely knows I exist. Then why has he changed his schedule 3 times this week to pass by the reception desk? Why did my sister say that he asked about you to the HR people at other companies? He's finding out about your life, Alice." Her heart raced. Arthur was asking about her? The revelation brought a mixture of terror and excitement that left her even more confused. "Look," Mark held her hands on the table. "I know you don't come from a wealthy family. I know that your mother's financial situation worries you. But I can't accept that you use our relationship as plan B while you try something impossible with a billionaire." "It's not that," Alice murmured, but her own voice sounded uncertain. "Then prove it to me. Quit your job." Alice stared at him, shocked. "What? If there's nothing between you, if he really means nothing to you, quit your job. I'll find another job for you. Maybe not at the same salary level, but you don't need to work so close to him." The suggestion terrified her. The idea of not seeing Arthur every day, of losing those stolen moments when he passed by the reception desk, seemed unbearable. And it was exactly that reaction that confirmed Mark's worst fears. "You don't want to quit your job," he said, letting go of her hands, "because you don't want to get away from him." While Alice struggled with her personal crisis, more powerful forces began to move behind the scenes. Edward Mendez, vice president of Sterling Tech and aspiring CEO, watched the situation with calculating interest. Edward had been passed over when Arthur took full control of the company after his father's death, and had since been looking for an opportunity to destabilize him. Involvement with a subordinate employee was exactly the ammunition he needed. Edward scheduled a discreet meeting with Monica Silva, a social columnist for the Business and Finance newspaper, known for her stories about the private lives of New York businessmen. "Monica, I have a story that might interest you," he said during a lunch at the Plaza Hotel, "about Arthur Sterling and a certain employee." "I've heard rumors," Monica smiled eagerly. "A receptionist, isn't it? But I need more than rumors. I can get photos," Edward lied. "And I have a close source that can confirm intimate details. Undeclared hospital expenses, private meetings outside of business hours. If you get concrete evidence, we pay well. And we publish it on the cover." Meanwhile, Arthur desperately tried to keep his distance from Alice, but found that it was impossible. Every time he saw her in the hallway, he remembered her body trembling in his arms, the tears of gratitude, the way she had touched his hand. The desire to protect her, to have her, was becoming uncontrollable. One Friday, he couldn't take it anymore. He asked Sandra to call Alice to his office under the pretext of reviewing new customer service procedures. "How's your mother?" was the first thing he asked when she came in. "Very well, thanks to you," Alice replied, maintaining a professional distance. "The medications are working. I'm glad." Arthur got up, walking to the window. "Alice, I need to talk about what people are saying." She stiffened. "I know there are rumors, Arthur. I'm going to try to transfer to another floor." "No!" The answer came out more vehemently than he intended. "I don't want you to transfer. I want people to stop making up stories." "Then what do you suggest?" Arthur turned to face her. That we be more careful, that we meet outside the company if we want to talk. The suggestion was dangerous, and both knew it. Meetings outside the professional environment would make everything more intimate, more real. I don't know if that's a good idea, Alice murmured. Why not? Arthur approached. Because you're engaged? Because, she hesitated, because I can't pretend anymore that you're just my boss. The confession hung in the air between them. Arthur took another step forward. And I can't pretend you're just my employee, he admitted. Alice, what's happening to us? She looked up to meet his eyes, and the intensity of the moment was overwhelming. Arthur raised his hand, almost touching her face, when the door opened abruptly. Sandra came in without knocking, carrying papers. She stopped in the middle of the room, realizing the tension and the proximity between them. Sorry, she stammered. I thought you were done. We're done, Alice said quickly, straightening her blouse and walking towards the door. Thank you for the guidance, Mr. Sterling. When Alice left, Sandra watched Arthur curiously. She had worked for him for 5 years and had never seen him so flustered. That night, Sandra received a call from Edward Mendez. Sandra, I need a favor, he said. Information about Arthur's private meetings with employees, especially with Alice Miller. Edward, I can't do that. It's unethical. I can double your current salary if you come work with me when I take over the company presidency. When you take over? Soon, Sandra. Arthur is making mistakes that are going to cost him dearly, and whoever is on my side will be rewarded. The seed of betrayal was planted. The rumors intensified. Mark pressed for a decision. Edward collected ammunition for a coup, and Arthur and Alice fought against an attraction that had become impossible to ignore. The secret they were trying to keep was becoming a ticking time bomb, and someone was about to light the fuse. The bomb exploded on a Monday morning. Alice arrived at work and immediately realized that something was wrong. Employees huddled in small groups, whispering and looking in her direction. Some held copies of the business and finance newspaper. Others looked at their cell phones with expressions of shock. Marcia from HR approached with a tense face. Alice, I need to talk to you, urgent. What's happening? Marcia handed her the newspaper. On the cover, a grainy but unmistakable photo. Arthur and Alice holding hands in the hospital waiting room. The headline screamed, CEO Arthur Sterling in forbidden romance with subordinate employee. Alice felt her legs weaken. She quickly read the article signed by Monica Silva. Sources close to the situation confirm that billionaire Arthur Sterling, CEO of Sterling Tech, is having an intimate relationship with Alice Miller, a receptionist at the company. Silva allegedly spent more than $50,000 on medical treatments for the employee's mother, who is engaged to another man. The scandal raises questions about abuse of power and harassment in the corporate environment. How did they get that picture? Alice murmured. That's not the point now, Marcia said. The board is calling an emergency meeting. You need to prepare for an interrogation. While Alice struggled to process the situation, Arthur arrived at the office to find Edward Mendez waiting in his office, accompanied by 3 members of the administrative board. Arthur, Edward smiled falsely, I believe we need to talk about this embarrassing situation. Arthur saw the newspaper on his desk and felt a cold rage take over him. How dare you invade my privacy? Your privacy? Dr. Carvalho, the oldest member of the board, shook his head disapprovingly. Arthur, you are the CEO of a publicly traded company. Your actions directly reflect on the reputation of Sterling Tech. Furthermore, Edward added, there are serious legal issues here. Relationship with a subordinate, possible harassment, improper use of company resources. I didn't use company resources, Arthur said coldly. Any expense was personal, but the relationship existed, Dr. Carvalho asked directly. Arthur hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough time for Edward to smile victoriously. I'll interpret your silence as confirmation, Edward said. The board has already decided. You need to temporarily step down from the presidency while an internal investigation is conducted, and the employee will be fired immediately. No! Arthur exploded. Alice is not to blame for anything. If you want a culprit, it's me. Leave her out of this. Too late, Edward retorted. The dismissal has already been processed. And frankly, Arthur, your reaction only confirms how compromised you are. 3 floors below, Alice was escorted by security guards to her desk to collect her personal belongings. Employees watched her as if she were a criminal. Some women made malicious comments. I always knew she was after something. Receptionists don't earn that much based on competence. Poor fiancé. Alice's cell phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mark, her mother, her sister, all wanting explanations about the headlines that were spreading through social media. She turned off the phone, unable to face the questions. When she got home, she found Mark waiting with her suitcases at the apartment door. Your things, he said coldly. I can no longer maintain our engagement. Mark, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you've been deceiving me for months? That you were having an affair with your boss while we were planning our wedding? He threw the engagement ring on the floor at her feet. My entire family saw this article. I'm being ridiculed at work. I can no longer look at you. I never cheated on you, Alice said desperately. Nothing physical ever happened between me and Arthur. But you fell in love with him, Mark retorted. And that's worse than any physical betrayal. You used me as security while you dreamed of another. Alice couldn't deny it because it was true. Mark took her keys and threw them along with the ring. I hope it's worth it, he said before closing the door. Alice found herself alone in the hallway, with 2 suitcases and a destroyed future. She lost her job, her fiancé, her reputation, and why? For an impossible love that perhaps didn't even really exist on Arthur's part. Meanwhile, Arthur desperately tried to contact her, but Alice's number was always busy. He drove to her apartment, but the doorman informed him that she had moved out that morning. It was Sandra who told him the truth the following Wednesday, when guilt finally consumed her. Arthur, I need to tell you something, she said, entering his temporary office on the lower floor. The photo in the newspaper, I'm the one who said where you would be. Arthur stared at her incredulously. What? Edward offered me a promotion. He said that you would be removed anyway, and that I should think about my future. Sandra was crying. He made me believe that I was saving the company from a bigger scandal. You betrayed me, Arthur said in a dangerously low voice. You betrayed Alice. You destroyed her life. I didn't know it was going to come to this. I thought it would just be a warning, a discreet conversation with the board. Arthur stood up, walking to the window. Down below, he saw Alice leaving the building for the last time, carrying a box with her belongings. Even from a distance, he could see that she was crying. Get out of my sight, he said to Sandra. You're fired. Arthur, please, get out. When Sandra left, Arthur punched the wall so hard that he bruised his knuckles. He had lost everything, the company he had built, the woman he loved, his reputation. And worse, Alice was paying an even higher price for having gotten involved with him. Alice, at that moment, was on the bus returning to the Bronx, back to her mother's house. Donna Carmen received her without questions, just hugging the daughter who returned defeated. Onime and binacentue Satan de city. Mom? Alice cried on her mother's shoulder. I ruined everything. I lost my job, I lost Mark. I've become a laughingstock in the entire city. My daughter. Donna Carmen caressed Alice's hair. Sometimes life breaks us to rebuild us stronger. But what if I fell in love with the wrong person? What if Arthur never felt anything real for me? It was the doubt that tormented her the most. Perhaps all that connection she had felt was just her imagination. Maybe Arthur Sterling saw in her just a passing distraction, someone different from his world of self-serving socialites. In the newspapers of the following days, Arthur appeared with other women at social events, trying to rebuild his image or genuinely moving on. She didn't know. After a week, Alice stopped reading about him, stopped looking for news online, stopped waiting for him to look for her. He had returned to his world and she to hers. And maybe it was better that way. 2 weeks after the scandal, Alice was registered as unemployed, living in her childhood bedroom and trying to rebuild a life that seemed to have completely collapsed. Arthur, officially removed from the presidency of Sterling Tech, also faced his own downfall. Edward had taken temporary control and was systematically erasing Arthur's legacy in the company. Both were alone, destroyed, and there seemed to be no hope that they would find their way back to each other. 3 weeks had passed since the scandal, and Alice had become accustomed to the suffocating routine of being unemployed. She woke up late, helped her mother with household chores, looked for jobs online, and faced the inevitable rejections. Her name was mud in the New York corporate market. No company wanted to hire the woman who had seduced Arthur Sterling. It was on a Thursday that everything changed. Alice was at the supermarket with Donna Carmen when she heard 2 women talking in the cereal aisle. Edward Mendez took over the presidency of Sterling Tech definitively yesterday. They say Arthur Sterling won't even contest it. It was a matter of time. A man who gets involved with an employee doesn't have the moral standing to run a company. But didn't you think it was strange? The photo appeared right when Edward was about to take over. Alice stopped pretending to choose rice and paid attention.
Strange how?
My sister-in-law works there in the legal department. She said that Edward had been preparing for a coup for months, and that Arthur's assistant had been seen several times in Edward's office before the scandal. Alice's blood froze. Sandra. Arthur's assistant had been with Edward before the photo appeared. That night, Alice couldn't sleep. The pieces began to fit together in a disturbing way. The photo in the hospital, who could have taken it? How did the journalists know exactly where they would be? And why had the article been published just when Edward was pushing for changes in the board? The next morning, Alice did something she hadn't done in weeks. She got properly dressed and went out with a purpose. She headed to the Sterling Tech building, not to work, but to find answers. She waited in the coffee shop across from the building until she saw Sandra leaving for lunch. The woman was visibly tense, looking over her shoulder constantly, as if she were being watched. "Sandra!" Alice approached her on the sidewalk. The assistant almost dropped her bag. "Alice, What are you doing here?" "We need to talk." "I can't. I have appointment." "About the photo of the hospital," Alice insisted, blocking her path. "About how it appeared in the newspaper." Sandra's face paled. "I don't know anything about that." "Liar, you were there, Sandra. You knew where we were." Alice approached. "The question is why? What did Edward offer you to betray me?" Sandra looked around nervously. "Alice, you don't understand. Things aren't as they seem. Then explain it to me." After much hesitation, Sandra agreed to talk in a cafe away from the business district. With trembling hands, she told the whole truth. Edward's pressure, the promises of promotion, how she had been manipulated into believing that she was saving the company from a bigger scandal. "I didn't know it was going to destroy your life," Sandra cried. "Edward said it would only be a discreet warning for Arthur. That you two needed a scare to stop that before it became a bigger problem. And you believed it?" "Edward showed me numbers. He said that the investors were worried about the company's image, that Arthur was losing focus because of you. He made it seem like I was being patriotic, saving jobs." Alice felt anger and compassion at the same time. Sandra had been just another pawn in Edward's game. "There's one more thing," Sandra continued. "Edward is planning something for this weekend. He's going to announce big changes in the company, fire people loyal to Arthur, restructure everything. He wants to completely erase Arthur's legacy from Sterling Tech." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I found out that Edward never intended to promote me. Yesterday, I received a termination notice. He used me too." Alice left the cafe with a determination she hadn't felt in weeks. Edward had orchestrated everything. He had destroyed her reputation, removed Arthur from the company, ruined multiple lives just to satisfy his ambition. And now he planned to eliminate any trace of the real Sterling Tech, but Alice wasn't going to allow it. First, she looked for Marcus Oliveira, an investigative journalist who had worked on some stories about corporate corruption. Marcus initially hesitated to meet her. After all, she was the femme fatale of the Sterling scandal, but his expertise in unmasking conspiracies spoke louder. "I need concrete evidence," he said after hearing her story. "Emails, recordings, documents, something that proves that Edward orchestrated everything. Sandra has access to the corporate emails, and there are records of his meetings with the columnist from the newspaper. Would Sandra agree to cooperate?" If we offer her protection and the chance to clear her name, yes. As Alice articulated her counter-offensive, she discovered that she wasn't alone. Several Sterling Tech employees had noticed Edward's questionable maneuvers. Some looked for Alice discreetly. She had become, ironically, a symbol of resistance against Edward's usurpation. "The company hasn't been the same since Arthur left," said Felipe from the IT department. "Edward is firing the most competent people and hiring his own allies. In 6 months, Sterling Tech will only be a shadow of what it was." Alice organized secret meetings with this group of loyal employees. They collected evidence, compromising emails from Edward, records of his meetings with journalists, documents that proved how he had manipulated the administrative board. The most valuable was an audio that Felipe managed to recover from the company's servers, a conversation between Edward and Monica Silva, the columnist, where he clearly orchestrated the publication of the defamatory article. "We have enough evidence to take down Edward," Marcus said at a meeting in his apartment. "But we need a suitable stage for the revelation. Something public, where he can't run or suppress the story. It was Sandra who provided the perfect opportunity. Edward has scheduled a press conference for Monday. He will officially announce his definitive appointment as CEO and present the new vision of Sterling Tech. All the business media will be present." Alice smiled for the first time in weeks. "It was the perfect stage. But there's a problem," Sandra continued. "Arthur doesn't know anything about this. He's completely isolated himself. He doesn't even know that he's definitively losing the company he built." Alice felt a pang in her chest. During all those weeks, she had wondered if Arthur missed her, if he had tried to look for her, if he regretted what had happened. Discovering that he was as lost and isolated as she was awakened all the feelings she had tried to bury. "Someone needs to tell him," Felipe said. Everyone looked at Alice. It was obvious that she was the only person who could make Arthur fight for the company again. But that meant facing him, risking discovering that he really felt nothing for her, that all that suffering had been in vain. "I'll go," Alice said finally. "He has the right to know what really happened." Marcus nodded. "We have until Monday to coordinate everything. Alice, you talk to Arthur. Sandra, you guarantee access to the press conference. Felipe, prepare all the digital evidence. We're going to expose Edward Mendez before all the business media in the country." For the first time in weeks, Alice felt alive again. She was no longer the victim of the scandal. She was a fighter, prepared to regain her dignity and perhaps, if she was, Lucky, the man she loved. Sunday night, she was in front of the luxury apartment building where Arthur lived, holding an envelope with all the evidence they had collected. The doorman hesitated to announce her. There were certainly instructions not to let her up, but Alice hadn't come this far to give up now. "Tell him that Alice Miller has information about Edward Mendez that can save Sterling Tech," she said firmly. 5 minutes later, the doorman cleared her entrance. Arthur was waiting for her at the apartment door, and Alice felt her heart race at the sight of him. He was thinner, with deep dark circles under his eyes, unshaven. But his eyes still had that intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. "Alice," he said, and his voice carried a weight of longing and regret that she didn't expect. "I need you to listen to me," she said, extending the envelope. "Edward didn't win. He stole it. And tomorrow we're going to prove that to the whole world." Arthur spent the whole night reading each document, listening to each recording, processing the magnitude of Edward's betrayal. Alice stayed by his side, explaining every detail of the conspiracy, watching the emotions alternate on his face: anger, disbelief, determination. "He destroyed our life to steal my company," Arthur murmured, clenching his fists. "He used you. He used Sandra. He manipulated the board. All for power. And now he thinks he's won," Alice said softly. "But he hasn't won, Arthur. Tomorrow at the press conference, we're going to show the world who Edward Mendez really is." Arthur got up and walked to the window, watching the city that he had conquered and lost. "Alice, why are you doing this? After everything you've suffered because of me. Because it wasn't your fault what happened to us," she replied, approaching. "And because..." She hesitated. Because I couldn't stop loving you, even when I thought I should." Arthur turned to face her, and for the first time in weeks, there was hope in his eyes. "Alice, no," she interrupted him. "First, we're going to save your company. Then we'll talk about us." The next morning, the conference room at Sterling Tech was packed with journalists, investors, and executives. Edward, impeccable in his Italian suit, prepared for his moment of glory, the definitive coronation as CEO of the company he had conquered through lies. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edward began, smiling confidently, "today I mark the beginning of a new era for Sterling Tech, an era of responsible growth, far from the scandals that tarnished our recent reputation." At the back of the room, Alice, Arthur, Marcus, and Felipe watched. Sandra was positioned strategically near the sound system, ready for her part in the plan. "The previous management," Edward continued, "allowed inappropriate relationships to compromise our corporate integrity. Under my leadership, this will never happen again." It was the moment Alice had been waiting for. She nodded to Sandra, who discreetly activated the audio system that Felipe had prepared. Edward's voice echoed through the hall, but it wasn't the words he was saying on stage. It was his recorded conversation with Monica Silva. "Monica, I need you to publish this story about Arthur and the receptionist on Monday. I have the photo, I have the witnesses. It's our chance to take him out of the game definitively. But Edward, if there wasn't really an affair, it doesn't matter if there was or not. What matters is the perception. Arthur Sterling needs to fall, and you're going to help me with that." The hall exploded in confused murmurs. Edward, pale, tried to turn off the microphone, but the audio continued. "And what about the employee? Sandra is already on my side. She's going to provide all the intimate details needed to make the story convincing. For 50,000, she'd sell her own mother." Edward shouted to cut off the audio, but it was too late. The recording revealed every detail of the conspiracy, how he had manipulated Sandra, bribed journalists, forged evidence to destroy Arthur. "This is a hoax!" Edward bellowed. "Someone tampered with these recordings." That's when Arthur took the stage. "They didn't tamper with anything, Edward," said Arthur, his voice cold and controlled. "This is your real voice, conspiring to steal the company that my father and I built." The hall was in absolute silence. Arthur Sterling, the ousted CEO in disgrace, was back. "Ladies and gentlemen investors," Arthur addressed directly the people who mattered, "you have just heard proof that you were deceived. Edward Mendes orchestrated a coup based on lies, destroying innocent lives to satisfy his personal ambition." Marcus stood up in the back of the room. "Marcus Oliveira, Wall Street Journal. Mr. Sterling, do you have more evidence of these accusations?" Arthur smiled for the first time in weeks. "I have much more." The next 2 hours were an avalanche of revelations. Compromising emails, suspicious financial records, testimonies of coerced employees, everything came to light. Sandra, crying, publicly confessed how she had been manipulated. Felipe presented irrefutable digital evidence. Edward tried to flee the hall, but found security guards blocking the exit. Arthur had anticipated his reaction. "Edward Mendes," Arthur said as the cameras captured every moment, "you are fired, and you will face criminal charges for conspiracy, defamation, market manipulation, and fraud." When the press conference ended, with Edward being escorted by the police and the investors unanimously voting for Arthur's immediate reinstatement, the hall slowly emptied. Arthur and Alice were alone on the stage, where everything had been resolved. "We did it," Alice said softly. "You did it," Arthur corrected, walking to her. "I had given up. I was ready to let Edward steal everything I built. But you fought when I didn't have the strength to fight. I fought for both of us." Arthur stopped in front of her, so close that Alice could feel his scent. "Alice, about what you said yesterday, about still loving me, it was true," she admitted. "Even when I thought you would never feel the same, even when I thought we had lost everything, I never stopped loving you." "Then get ready," Arthur said, raising his hands to touch her face. "Because I intend to spend the rest of my life making up for all the suffering that my cowardice caused." He kissed her right there, on the Sterling Tech stage, in front of the cameras that were still recording. It was a kiss that contained weeks of longing, fear, hope, and repressed love. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. "I love you, Alice Miller," Arthur said against her lips. "And this time, I'm going to shout it for the whole world to hear." 6 months later, Sterling Tech had not only recovered its reputation, but reached new heights of success. Arthur implemented transparent workplace relationship policies and became an advocate for employee rights, especially for women in vulnerable positions. Alice, now as Director of Human Resources, completely reformed the company's internal policies. But her greatest achievement was not professional. It was on a Friday night that Arthur took her back to the hall where it all began, the location of the charity bridal fashion show that had changed their lives forever. "Remember when I saw you on this stage for the first time?" he asked as they walked hand in hand. "How could I forget? It was when you discovered you loved me." "No." Arthur stopped and knelt before her, taking a small box out of his pocket. "It was when I discovered that I wanted to see you dressed as a bride forever, for me." Alice covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. "Alice Miller, you saved my company, you saved my soul. You taught me that love is worth any risk. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, then shouted, "Yes." When Arthur put the ring on her finger, Alice realized that her story had begun on that stage with her dressed as a bride, pretending to be happy. Now it ended in the same place, with her being proposed to by the man she truly loved. Donna Carmen, who had secretly arrived to witness the proposal, cried tears of joy in the front row. Carla filmed everything on her cell phone. Sandra, now readmitted and forgiven, had organized the whole surprise with tears of happiness. "This time," Arthur said, kissing his future wife, "when you wear the wedding dress, it will be real, forever." And it was. 3 months later, in a ceremony that united two worlds, the business elite and the humble family from the Bronx, Alice walked down a runway again, dressed as a bride. But this time, Arthur was waiting for her at the altar, with tears of happiness and a love that had overcome all obstacles. The jealousy that had awakened his feelings had transformed into eternal devotion. The receptionist who doubted her worth had become the woman who would command alongside him an empire built on honesty and true love. And on the front social pages of the newspapers that had previously defamed them, a new headline: "The greatest corporate love story of the century. Arthur Sterling and Alice get married in moving ceremony." But for them, only one truth mattered. Love had won, as it always should.